Stabile. We connected through LinkedIn, yes, but we've never met. And so yeah, thank you, Prof. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for inviting me.
Guys, are we ready? Okay. Prof, I sent you the program, so we are going to follow the program. The program director here is Prof. Gabenda. She's going to kickstart the program. Thank you.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good day and good morning to all of you that have joined us here today. Special words of welcome to Professor Mtose, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Zululand, Professor Siepe, our DVC for Institutional Support, Professor V.S. Nomlomo, our DVC for Teaching and Learning, Professor Ntumbela, the Dean of the Faculty of Education, and other deans that have joined us here today, colleagues from the Faculty of Education and other faculties, and our guest speaker, Professor Opuku Agiman from Montclair State University, USA. We are very honored that you are here able to join us today on Africa Day, which is celebrated annually on May 24th. The month of Africa is also recognized as Africa Month. The month of May is actually recognized as Africa Month, a time when the continent of Africa actually commemorates the founding of the Organization of the African Union. And since the years, the African Union has actually used this day to launch a series of programs, and these issues attend to address issues such as gender, youth, health, and so on. And this year, in the year 2022, the theme focuses on nutrition. I'm now going to hand you over to our DVC, our VC, Professor Mtose, who's going to do the official words of welcome.
Thank you.
Nice.
Okay, now we're going to be listening to the welcome from Professor Mtose, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Zululand. Okay, we're just waiting for it to start. Sorry for the technical glitches. Okay, while we're waiting for the video to start.
Management. Our distinguished guest, Professor Ackerman, academics and support staff present, deans of our faculties, students, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this year's celebration of Africa Day. A bit of background is necessary. The 25th of May is celebrated as Africa Day, not only in Africa, but also in the diaspora. The day has been set aside to commemorate the founding of Organization of African Unity, OAU, on the 25th May in 1963. The founding of the Organization of African Unity is an expression of commitment, a covenant entered by Africans and their leaders to free Africa from centuries of colonial subjugation. At the time of the founding of OAU, 32 countries had attained their political independence. This was a major achievement considering that 5 years earlier, there were only 5 independent countries. This yearning for freedom has become spiritual, a cultural pilgrimage, a sort for people of African descent. The abiding spirit and driving force behind this global commitment by people of African descent was best articulated by one of our founding members and Ghana's founding father, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Delivering a seminal address, Africa Must Unite, at the founding of OAU, Nkrumah argued, quote, "It has not taken us long to consider that the struggle against colonialism does not end with attainment of national independence. Independence is only the prelude of a new and more involved struggle for the right to conduct our own economic and social affairs, to construct our society accordingly to our aspirations, unhampered by the crushing and humiliating neo-colonial controls and interference," close quote. We owe our political independence to those leaders that dare to dream. Nkrumah continued, "African unity is, above all, a political kingdom which can only be gained by political means. The social and economic development of Africa will come only when the political kingdom, not the other way around. The United States of America, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, were the political decisions of revolutionary peoples before they become mighty realities of social power and material wealth. How, except by our united efforts, will the richest and still enslaved parts of our continent be freed from colonial occupation and become available to us for the total development of our continent," close quote. Africa Day provides us with the opportunity to celebrate, honor, and reflect on the historical significance of the commitment that were taken by our forebears. Had it not been their sacrifices, it would have taken long to dismantle the shackles of colonialism. They planted the seeds of revolution that swept throughout the length and the breadth of our beloved continent. As Nkrumah and others observed, Africa has moved from the state of colonialism to a new form of colonialism. The colonialists have done a good job to sustain the colonial project by co-opting some of our own to do the order for them. This brings us to the second aspect of Africa Day. Africa Day provides with another opportunity to take stock and reflect on how far we have come. This involves embarking on a situational analysis, which we assign tasks to ourselves, tasks that are aimed at addressing the unfinished business of the total emancipation of African people. Africa has not lived up to the expectations that Nkrumah hoped images of Africa were unedifying. Notwithstanding our hopes, Africa does not inspire confidence among its citizens and those outside the continent. For too long, the continent was dogged by instability, political violence, economic crisis, military coups, corruption, and health crisis. The continent is currently bedeviled by the economic stagnation, persistent food shortages, the burgeoning debt that has led to the growing of marginalization in the global economy. The continent is a poster child of poverty and underdevelopment. We are thus presented with a task. We are called upon to address perennial issues whose origin can be traced to the crises of government and state building. Our challenges have been propounded by the environmental degradation and unprecedented health crisis, malaria, HIV/AIDS, and recently the coronavirus pandemic. The onset of COVID-19 has devastated the fledgling economies that seem to have been on the upward trend. Job losses continue unabated. Foreign direct investment is still to materialize. Having painted this gloomy picture brings us back to inevitable question: what is it to be done? The answer is to be found in the questions we raise and the ideas we propound. What we think, we become. It is all about power of positive thinking. It is about daring to dream, as founding fathers of the Organization of African Unity did. We dare not fail them, the current and the future generation. It is in keeping with this mission that the University of Zululand is positioning itself to become a node for African thought. We do this cognizant of our historical and social cultural context, not only at the level of the immediate community in which we are located, but also at the wider provincial, national, and international context. This brings me on today's presentation, Pan-Africanism and its realistic prospects for the future, by our esteemed guest, Professor Opoku Agyeman. The challenge we face as Africans is located in our colonial history. As Professor Agyeman so eloquently puts it, open quote, Africans bear a history with hundreds of years of dehumanizing, stigmatizing, enslavement wrought to the Arabs and then the Europeans. The horrific nature of the bondage and its longevity engraved on Africans an enduring image of natural servitors to the other races, close quote. Linked to this damage that has been done to the psyche of the African people wherever they are, the greatest factor with Africa's continued subjugation is to be in its surrender to colonial oppression. In this regard, without delving into Professor Agyeman's paper, I couldn't agree more with him in his observation that it is not the experience of the oppression per se, but the facilitation and the acceptance of oppression which degrades a people. It is also inconceivable that once transported outside Africa in chains, the Africans, for the most part, settled on a destined servitude as against the resolute, principled, spiritual covenant to refuse at all costs to become other people's donkeys. Close quote. Closer to home, the message of Professor Agyeman resonates with Steve Biko's observation that, open quote, the type of black man we have today has lost his manhood, reduced to an obliging sale. He looks with awe at the white power structure and accepts what he regards as the inevitable position. Deep inside, his anger mounts at the accumulating insult, but he vents it in the wrong direction, on his fellow men, in the townships, on the property of black people, close quote. Nothing short of a revolution is required to reverse this debilitating condition. I will leave the mechanics of the revolution to be dealt with by our honored guest. Ladies and gentlemen, I now have the honor to welcome Professor Agyeman, and I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Mtose, for outlining the significance and the background of Africa Day and for the official words of welcome. I'm now going to hand you over to the Dean of the Faculty, Prof. Ntombela, who is going to be introducing our guest speaker.
Thank you, Program Director. Good afternoon, VCs. Special welcome to you and to your DVCs and the executives present here, also to the deans and all the colleagues that are present and also online. It is my pleasure to introduce Prof. Opoku Agyeman to you. He is a Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Montclair State University in New Jersey and director of the Pan-African Society and Foundation, whose commission is the cultivation and nourishing of a universal Black racial family and the integration of Black Africa into a union of African states. Prof. Ajiman is also editor of the Pan-Africanist. He previously taught at Cornell University at Ithaca, the University of California at Berkeley, the University of Dar es Salaam, and the University of the West Indies, among other institutions. His research focuses on the antithetical consequences of power and powerlessness in global affairs, Africa's perennially vulnerable link to the international system, and the imperative of genuine racial empowerment through political integration in sub-Saharan Africa, and the formulation of Pan-Africanism as the authentic ideological canvas for Africa's future. He has written, published extensively books, monographs, book chapters, articles, magazines, and reviews. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Prof. Opoku Ajiman to the floor. Thank you, Prof. Over to you now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Start my video. Okay. Am I on?
Yes.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I feel very humble in thinking about the fact that you considered me to participate in this important occasion. The introductions that have come have indicated that I am going to be speaking about Pan-Africanism. I am going to emphasize its realistic prospects for the future. Pan-Africanism is deemed to have died at the 6th Pan-African Congress that was held in Dar es Salaam in 1974. After an assembly of people I call escapist universalists, set upon it and dispatched it in one dramatic act of political assassination. The perpetrators were by and large people who disparaged the importance of race as an organizing principle. These were people who refused to come to terms with the reality that Black people, because they have gone through unparalleled, abysmal historical victimization and humiliation, will continue to be scorned and disrespected everywhere until by their own instrumentality, through their own exclusive exertions, they find a way to recover their human honor and dignity through empowerment. Now, Dar es Salaam 1974 completed the tragic repudiation of racial Pan-Africanism that Kwame Nkrumah started right after Ghana's independence. Nkrumah had been baptized into racial Pan-Africanism a la Garveyism during his student days in the United States. And in fact, he wrote in his autobiography about how Garvey's ideas made the strongest impact on his intellectual development. And yet, soon after he became president of Ghana, at a time when Pan-Africanists around the world were urging him on to plant the tree of Pan-Africanism on African soil, he turned around onto a different new focus of Afro-Arab continentalism, away from the racial Pan-Africanism of Marcus Garvey and the Pan-Africanists across the diaspora. So what happened in 1974 in Dar es Salaam, the 6th Pan-African Congress, was in fact the completion, the denouement of what Nkrumah started. From the moment his organizing efforts moved in the direction of Afro-Arab continentalism and away from racial Pan-Africanism. This is an important point that I'm pursuing very strongly in my research efforts because the people who have kindly introduced me have made a point about the continuing disarray of the African world. The fact that Africa remains a backwater of other continents and other nations. We moved in the direction of universalism, and all we have reaped from it is this terrible spectacle of Africa that cannot hold its own, of Africa that has not become a powerful base of political operations that supports lives of African people on the continent and supports the lives and the protection of Africans in the diaspora. If Pan-Africanism had become planted on African soil, a robust, unfettered racial Pan-African organizational motor could have generated, propelled, and rallied a veritable campaign for transformation and racial redemption worldwide. It could have rescued and fortified Haiti, for instance, from its geographical curse, from its perpetually wretched political orphanhood in the Americas. And it could have boosted and sustained the Pan-African Congress of South Africa, as well as providing it could have boosted and sustained the PAC within South Africa, as well as providing its vital fraternal support during its dire exile years, at a time when its antithesis, the ANC, was wallowing in copious support from particularly Western economic and political forces, championing non-revolutionary status quo multiracialism. Organizational endeavors following 1958, the OAU and then the AU, because they were delinked from the African diaspora, became edifices without foundation, much like trees with fractured, eviscerated roots. In particular, the AU emerged as a donor-dependent body, an organization characterized by a high dependency rate on its former colonizers. Africa's political posture has remained extremely brittle and inconsequential. The power deficiency that allowed the Arabs and then the Europeans to break into the continent and enslave and dehumanize its people has remained unchanged. Across a wide range of power indices, Black Africa lags woefully behind other regions and nations. Culturally, and not just in the political economic arena, Africans have been as open to the world as a turtle without a shell. The French colonial doctrine of assimilation presupposed a divine era in the creation of Black people. Africans seem to concur in this. And this has led to, in the calculation of Don Graville Davis, a malaise of a deep and deepening loss of a distinctive sense of identity. As David put it, we have been everywhere, have been molded in every identity, have taken of every culture, practiced every religion, and believed in every one, save ourselves. It is time to end the escapism of universalizing every human challenge and its perpetual solution, whether by way of proletarian internationalism, presumptive religious fraternity, or biological self-disintegration into another race. I maintain that it is time to return to the solution of racial self-repair. It is time to give full-fledged racial Pan-Africanism a chance. It is time to turn to an indigenous thought system drawn from the innermost triumphant as well as tragic historical experiences of Black people across the centuries, alongside tangible proposals for racial restoration. There is a need to mobilize the Black youth through drastically revamped school curriculum, operating under an overarching institutional mechanism of a University of the Black world. It is time also to establish a code of primordial citizenship for all overseas Africans to enable them to participate fully and directly on affairs of Africa and its people on the continent. The absolute necessity for a secure and autonomous political environment where major breakthroughs, uplifting achievements can readily be seen and recognized universally as a Black achievement is at the core of the prospects, the hopeful prospects that I'm thinking about. There's an absolute need to create the power base that Marcus Garvey talked about. It is only that kind of base that can provide an autonomous environment for credible Black achievements, the kinds of breakthroughs that begin to transform the image of Africans from the tragedies of our history of enslavement. The problems posed by a multiracial context, harboring socially unequal groups or segments, are quite plain to all of us, whether in the United States or in South Africa. Consider the fact that the achievement of two Black mathematicians, Doctors Gladys West and Katherine Johnson, in inventing the global positioning system, the GPS, is hardly known at all to this day. The Racial Pan-African Project's potential in the bolstering and release of fraternal interactive developmental energy between the Black nation and its overseas children can be gleaned from the fruitful relationship that has been developed between Israel and American Jews since 1948. There's need to mobilize the Black youth through drastically revamped school curriculum. And this needed revision of the university curriculum or the school curriculum from grade 1 up cannot be overemphasized. So much that is irrelevant is being taught across the continent in schools. And what we need to know about our history, the ancient segment of our history, as well as the more recent ones, spanning hundreds of years. I put recent in quotes, hundreds of years of enslavement, followed by the colonization and the exploitation of our continent. That history needs to be the fulcrum, the substructure of our education. And we need to draw the proper lessons in terms of proper righteous anger, in terms of a resolve, fundamental resolve to change the way things have been, to change and reverse course from all the terrible things that we as a people have gone through. We know we need this history in order to be able to understand the reasons behind our being so far behind and being so fundamentally still vulnerable and prostrate at the hands of others. And from this history, especially from the ancient history portion, we need to, in a sense, drum up the kind of confidence, collective self-confidence that asserts that if we did all of these things in the past, in the deep past, then certainly we are capable of doing even more spectacular things in the present. So relaunching a Pan-African movement based on on racial Pan-Africanism, connecting Africans in the diaspora with the Africans in the mother continent, should bring about a new outlook on what constitutes development in Africa. And I am very much taken with the importance of research in this direction. I am, in a sense, charting a radical path away from any conception that the OAU as it was established and the AU that followed in its wake are the kinds of organizations that we need in Africa, particularly the continuation of the African-Arab nexus, seemingly on the assumption that we have certain things, we share anything in common, is a fundamental problem for any thinking individuals. It is not impossible by any stretch of the imagination to understand how this came about. Much of the research that I have done points to the Pan-African Congress in 1945 in London, in Manchester, England, where Nkrumah first met George Padmore. Nkrumah had left the United States. C.A.R. James was one of the people who strongly recommended him to Padmore, and the brethren in Britain and in Europe who were looking forward to organizing the fifth Pan-African Congress. He was recommended to them as someone who was going to plant the seed of Garveyism in Africa. There was no question that there was a need to place the tree of Pan-Africanism on the African soil. The ideas of the ideology have been constructed, have been propounded in the diaspora among the people who intellectually came to understand very clearly that the woes of African people across the globe, inside or outside of Africa, had everything to do with the political weakening of Africa. The fact that Africa had been reduced to a powerlessness that allowed any person who wanted to come in and destroy its people and expropriate its land and its resources to be able to do so. They concluded that the only way to get around this problem was to create a power base on the African soil, a power base that will, in a sense, become a super state, wielding all the capabilities that a modern state needed, including all the necessary defenses that will make it impossible for future enemies and detractors to come in and destroy us again. And that this super state will then, through linkages to Africans across the globe, begin the process of, in a sense, providing the needs of supports that our people in the United States or in Jamaica or in Colombia or in Haiti or in the Dominican Republic or in Argentina, in every one of these places where Africans have been sent and are seen as descendants of slaves and are referred to where they live as slave-descended communities to this day, that this Pan-African state will provide linkages to them, understanding that these Africans are all children, overseas children of a race of people who need to be uplifted. It is not understandable how Nkrumah, after the during the Pan-African Congress in Manchester, during this time of interacting with George Padmore, began to move in the direction of a Marxism that has never helped anybody, any downtrodden people who want to raise themselves up. An intellectual idea that Europeans entertain themselves with. But it has not helped because fundamentally nobody wants to link up with the people who are seen as devalued, who are seen as subhuman, working classes within every one of these countries who are non-Africans don't want to be part of us. The whole idea of establishing the notion that we have something in common because we are poor, we are all being exploited, is something that they have rejected time and time again. And yet the so-called intellectuals insist this has to be the basis. We will not do anything by ourselves until we can rally the whole world into some universal organizational structures that will liberate the whole world. But the whole world could be liberated. The whole of capitalistic imperialism could be uprooted and destroyed, but it will not change the enduring image of a people who went through so many hundreds of years being treated like animals. It has left an indelible mark in other people's minds about us. And the moment they see us, this is what is conjured up in their minds. I call it the law of instant contempt. Turning and seeing you, just it's the sight of you. Oh, it's one of, oh, it is this inconsequential. It is one of these slaves. Because as long as we haven't created what it takes to put slavery and the slavery experience and the degradation and the humiliations associated with it beyond the pale of memory, to make it look as if it no longer counts, because look where they are now. This must have been an aberration, a blot of history. It does not indicate any innate congenital inferiority or incapacity. Until that is done, the problems we have now, and you know about the enduring anti-Black racism across the globe, especially here in the United States. I mean, our people are killed. It is a daily occurrence. This insecurity, this disregard. Animals are deemed more valuable than dogs, and so on. And we allow this to continue because we are looking to some universalistic solutions. Either because, we will join forces with Christians around the world. Really, it has been established that Christian groups in the United States are the most racist. They are the ones who start by looking for some obscure text somewhere in the Bible and say, this is saying that Black people were created to be their slaves. You wouldn't dare enter one of their churches if you are here. You're talking about the labor movement in the United States and what it has gone through over the years. And yet we give the impression of the people who, there are two things. Either we think that dignification, lifting ourselves through a surge in dignity, through the accomplishments that we bring to bear. We either decide that it is not a primary value, in spite of all we've gone through and where we are. Or it must be because we doubt innately that we ourselves can do anything about our predicament. It may be the reason why we're always universalizing every kind of problem and its solution. This is a point of importance. And when people see us, they do not see how they can take us seriously. When we seem to be a people who either cannot think or cannot do anything for themselves in light of the horrible realities that encircle us. It is and across Africa, you only travel, just look at the way things are. Anything that requires technological engineering accomplishments, we're sending people through universities and this and that and that. If there's a road to be built, I don't know about South Africa now, I haven't been there. If it's a road to be built, they are bringing some firm from outside because the expertise has to come from them. They can use African labor if they wish. Sometimes they bring their own laborers, their own workers. If a road is to be built, they have to come and do it. We don't build railroads. We don't build subways. We don't build bridges. Everything somebody has to come and do to this day. So the question is, are we not doing anything about our predicament as a race of people who have been demoted, strongly demoted in terms of our human honor across the globe? Are we not doing anything about it because deep down we think we cannot? To me, these are central issues. These are fundamental issues. I happened to be in Ghana, and I really started to leave the place after the coup, because I had supported Nkrumah as a student, became a student leader. I was born in 1942, and it was in 1966, the year Nkrumah was ousted, that I was in my final year at the University of Ghana. In spite of the way things were going and the perplexity that engulfed a few of us who were following him, because across the campus, the thinking was that only people who went to Oxford or Cambridge, who went to British school, who are inducted into European British culture, they are the only people who mattered. And Nkrumah went to American school, and he went to them, that was enough. And they were not going to follow somebody who was not, properly educated. Dr. Buzia, who went to Oxford, and Kwapong, and he went to Cape. Yes, because we have to embrace their cultures, whether in fact institutional or otherwise, whether in fact there's anything being taught in any one of these universities that represent anything worth learning. And this was the environment. But we stood up, a few of us, hoping that things would change. Even at that time, I was writing articles in the local newspapers, free our schools from imperialism, let's be alive to Africa's revolution, and so on. And the others, they despised me. At the time of the coup, you have no idea what I went through at Legon. And it set the way for me to leave. Because in fact, even looking for a job under the military administration that took over was almost impossible. And I left. I needed to be in another part of Africa. I went to Uganda. And it is only Idi Amin's military coup and so on, and the terrible depredations thereafter that pushed me out. It was a messy situation. I've gone through one coup in Ghana, and now there was this one in Uganda. But later on, I will go to Ghana because my people are there. That's where I'm from. One day I was visiting a former friend of mine who were contemporaries at the University of Ghana. He had this motel that he had set up as a side kind of enterprise. In front of it, somebody's digging. Some people are repairing the road. I mean, huge holes here and there. You couldn't drive through that lane. And apparently, they seem to be taking a break because this white guy is walking up towards where we are. We're standing in front of the motel. He's smoking. When he got close, my friend called him out and said, "Sir, but I want to ask you a question. Why do you do this thing? How come you don't cover the gutters when you make these roads? Why do you leave them open? Why don't you do it the covered drainage system?" That the man looked at him. He looked at him. He looked down. He looked at him again, and he said, "You want covered drains, covered gutters? Why don't you do it by yourself or yourself, you fucking monkey? You fucking, why don't you do it for yourselves?" There's something about a situation that never changes. There's stagnation. And if it's going to happen, it has to be somebody coming from somewhere. It has to be somebody coming from somewhere. So my plea, this effort, is to revive interest in racial Pan-Africanism. Is to, in a sense, say, please, let's go back to Marcus Garvey and his stellar penetrating ideas. He never went to school. I said little elementary school here and there in Jamaica, and he became a trade union leader. But he saw something wrong. He saw a people down, largely slaves. He traveled across that part of the world, the Caribbean, and then went to South America. Everywhere he went, he saw Black people who were right on the bottom being trampled. And he said, this is not something that I can live with. He started to go to Europe. Then this man who never had formal education, this man, young man who started to think for himself, started to read into history, into ancient times, and to say, how can a people who were the ones who pioneered human existence and human civilization end up like this? What has happened? And this has to be the foundation of education in African schools. This is it. These are the issues. Where were we? How did we plummet to the depths, to the abyss? What forces brought this about? What internal weaknesses contributed to this? We do have some good idea. Chancellor Williams's work, The Destruction of Black Civilization, about how these ancient edifices crumbled. The educational system is not about that. It is not about the incursion later on of the Arabs. And what they did, once they formulated an ideology that lifted them up, that stirred them up, that provided this matrix of motivation. You should read about Muhammad worrying about the people who were so divided among themselves, so impotent in their divisiveness, in their dividedness, and said, we need an ideology that will pull them together. He didn't throw away the Bible. He drew upon the Bible. He drew upon the Torah. But he said, I have to add something that will give it an indigenous stamp, make it a legitimate ideology to rally my people. And that is what he did. And they stormed across once they united, and they became slave masters of us. They turned African men, they untold millions into Arabia. A very large percentage of them just to serve the women they have lined up in their harems. One man having 500, because this is a religion for fundamentally degraded and subjugated women. And they need people there to serve these women who couldn't sexually function, so they needed eunuchs. They castrated these Africans so crudely, doing it so crudely that the overwhelming majority died the moment they did it. But it didn't matter because they could go and get more for hundreds of years. And they are the ones who pointed the way later on to the Europeans, that these people have a fallen race. They've lost power. They are sitting ducks. They are there for the taking. When they found land here in the so-called New World, and the need arose to get unpaid labor to give them capital, to give them the profit they need for their development, naturally they turn to us. And now we think we have something in common with the Arabs. And now we have millions of Africans who are Islamic, dressing up in those gowns and having these names. What is anybody who is not an African supposed to think when they look at us? When is anybody who is not an African supposed to think when they look at us? What kind of people are these? Education, even in the classics. I've met Africans and I'm studying Latin and I'm studying Greek and in the English literature. They tell their stories. Every people have to tell their stories, to reenact their traditions, their customs, to share it for succeeding generations. And we do it by just assimilating into theirs. What is the need for English literature in any African school? What is the need to study anything about the lives of Europeans, except to look for the areas which speak to how they were able to come to us and destroy us?
Prof.
Thank
Prof.
you.
Altman.
Yes.
Yeah, we were asking you to please wrap up. We were giving you a minute to conclude. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I got carried away. I'm done. I think what I'm saying is I went to Tanzania to teach. I was so determined not to. After I was forced to leave Uganda in January of 1973, because after Idi Amin's wreckage, everybody was leaving Makerere, and just managed to put through a thesis for a master's degree. And when I later on, anyway, yeah, it's enough. Thank you. I think the main point is yes. Later on, I went back to I went to Dar es Salaam because after I finished my work here, I just needed to go back, and I went to Dar. I encountered some personal tragedy within a year of being within a few weeks actually of being there. It just these things happen, and but I didn't know when I was there that there had been this 6th Pan-African Congress. The diasporans had pushed for it, something that Nkrumah, in a sense, had repudiated in place in favor of the All-African People's Conference, bringing the Arabs in and that kind of thing. They wanted it. They wanted it to revived. And if you get a chance, please get that document of that 6th Pan-African Congress in Dar es Salaam, 1974, and read it. And you will find out how every speaker is talking about how we don't have to pay attention to race. Race is not important. What is important is class. And on and on and on and on and on. I am making a plea that we return to racial Pan-Africanism, especially in the wake of the wreckage, in the wake of in a sense, the futility of development efforts in Africa since the independence era of the 1960s, to rethink our ideological posture and to understand why it is absolutely necessary to revisit the writings of Marcus Garvey and the other Pan-Africanists who shared his ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof, for sharing your experiences with us and for speaking from your heart. We truly do appreciate it. And for that very insightful presentation, and also acknowledging the significant progress that Africans have made thus far, and for all the challenges that we have faced and we are still facing. I'm now actually going to hand the floor over to Professor Siepe, our DVC for institutional support, and he's going to respond to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and I also want to thank the VC for opening this session, and I also want to join the VC in welcoming Professor Agyemang. And most importantly, I must say I share with you the sense of what you call Russia's anger. Russia's anger at what you correctly call a capitulation from the original idea of Pan-Africanism, and also the posture that you, or articulation of, or description that you provide, that this is almost a form of escapism. And it has led to a situation where we continually universalize our problem instead of dealing with them. What you have done, and I hope this presentation can be expanded into a book, because you have taken us through a journey of Africa's engagement with the world. And most interestingly, as we celebrate Africa Day, you're pointing out of how Nkrumah was a beneficiary of the wisdom of Marcus Garvey, and also how much was expected from him. And much as we speak about his great speech of Africa Must Unite, your take on it as the beginning of a disembowelment of Pan-Africanism, that it is an irony that Nkrumah, who was a product and of this clear ideology, became also a person who planted the seeds of its own destruction. The shift from Pan-Africanism to some continentalism is something that comes out very, very clear. And what we know now as we speak, as you pointed out, is that it has led to Africans and the continent being in disarray. And that the move to universalism in Africa, in terms of its posture in dealing with the world, has led to the current state. And the current state is not the state that Africans can be proud of. And your articulation that perhaps it might be a good idea to start dealing with the challenges of the shifts that came in. And I also had the benefit of looking at the paper that you presented, and you have managed to summarize it for us, but I do think that it is one paper that Africans must read. And if I had powers that were bestowed on me, I would actually enforce that every student that comes from an African university would go through a book that you would have written that captures or expands, that provides an expansion and expatiate the ideas in this 35 page that I had the benefit of looking at. But as at the moment, the power deficiency that we see has led to the continued, despite Africa having been free politically, what we see is the stranglehold of the colonial powers. This power deficiency has led to Africa being culturally, socially, and economically emasculated. And what you point out the most sharply is that more of the same is not going to be an answer. And I do like your real articulation of what Pan-Africanism is. And also the pointing out that ultimately our biggest fault has been to run away from ourselves. Like you saying, we've been everywhere and we believed in everyone but ourselves. So this escapism points out to what you come down to as if people say what is to be done. But it comes down to saying, if you look at Pan-Africanism, it begins with the belief that the restoration project of our people of the continent is something that cannot be outsourced. And you rightfully point out to another disturbing element, that even the organizations that we look up to assist us to get out of this quagmire are themselves captured in the sense that they are so dependent on the very same people who are responsible for Africa's own subjugation. And I do like the title, and it's something that we would probably engage, or we will engage as we think about the charting a way forward with regard to the vision of the university becoming a real African university, which we hope will be imbued with the centrality of the notion of what we call in South Africa, black men, you are on your own. But I do see that given our experience, the prospects of Pan-Africanism are not as dire as they seem at the moment. Okay. And the future, for me, of Africa is intrinsically linked to our path in embracing Pan-Africanism. And without Pan-Africanism, at least we know now that Africa is doomed. So one of the things that comes out very clearly on that they must do, the things that we must do if we're going to move forward, is the importance of addressing the psychological damage that has been wrought on African minds as a result of centuries of colonialism and racial subjugation. And correctly you point out, and I'm sure that many scholars were going to disagree with this posture that you've taken, but part of the challenge that we have as Africans is our acquiescence to racial oppression, that as many people had put it in Africa, that the South Africans, for instance, if one uses an example, Africans are oppressed in this country, are marginalized economically, are marginalized culturally, because they allow it. If they don't respect themselves, there is no reason why anybody should respect them. And that comes very clear. In this country, we still have a situation where being white means that you can dictate.
Yes.
A black government means nothing.
Yes.
The apartheid regime and colonialism had succeeded in instilling the fear of God among Africans to an extent that they will be willing to sell their own. So for me, I do see that Pan-Africanism as the best articulated by Marcus Garvey through his Back to Africa movement, at least is one avenue, if not the main path that we may need to consider. And Garvey, as he rightfully says, in his approach of in the organizational form of Universal Negro Improvement Association, would have assisted even the weak amongst us, knowing full well that the people in the diaspora in Haiti, they've got the backing of a continental muscle. But when Africans themselves are in disarray, what we are going to end up is the situation where we are. So your paper does succeed to say in Pan-Africanism, we find an ideology that will lead or can lead to political and spiritual redemption. Yes. As you point out in your paper, that a race without power and authority is a race without respect. Yes. And I do think that what we will find in this ideology is an ideology that proclaims a commitment to racial improvement, resurgence, and also racial elevation. I find that in Garvey, there's a resonance between what he said with what the Biko was saying about Africans in this country. And it's interesting that we have succeeded to bury the ideas of people like Biko, let alone Marcus Garvey. Yes. That even in a country where the Black majority are supposedly being in power, they have been so colonized that they would rather try to mimic other people. Yes. The point that you also raised is the vulgarity of the impact of the psychological damage is when you find heads of states in Africa. I mean, if you deal with the issue of coronavirus, instead of looking at the African genius to try to resolve a challenge that they're facing, they collectively stand up on the rooftops, accusing the West of hoarding medicines, as if the West owes them something. I mean, how embarrassing can that be? The whole president, including our president, standing up, talking about the what you call apartheid, global apartheid, that deprives Black people of medicine. And then you find small countries that are busy trying to manufacture. But the first port of call would be to deal with the challenge of the psychological damage that was wrought by apartheid and colonialism. Then the second thing that you also point out in the paper is the tendency for Africans to put themselves or exploit the notion of being victims, but also even to talk about degrees of victimhood. But as you rightfully say, the steeper the fall, the greater should be the resolve. So our condition of marginalization is a necessary or requires an antidote like Pan-Africanism. And disappointingly, but what you have actually sobered us up with is for us to understand where we got it wrong. That with the formation of OAU and its successor, AU, we saw the continued bastardization of Pan-Africanism. Yes. We saw the disempowerment of the idea. We saw the disempowerment of Pan-Africanism. And what it led to is a continued downgrading of race as an organizing bedrock of the movement of for African liberation and empowerment. So in a sense, it is in as much as we credit the founding fathers of OAU, we also need to be critical in terms of how they actually failed us in understanding what the issues are. But like you say, if you ask the wrong questions, you're not going to get the right answer. And if you've got the wrong ideology, you are also not going to get the answer. Right now, we know that the ideology or the horse that we have been on, it's a dead horse. And flogging the dead horse is not gonna salvation. So that to me is the import of your take. But as an assignment, and they're giving your age in years and your experience, I wish you could turn this paper into a book. And I do think the salvation lies in the correctness of those ideas. And of course, we are going to be having debates around what some people call essentialism. But the truth of the matter is, nations that have been able to take themselves out of quagmire have been nations that put themselves first. If you look at the Jewish community, they put themselves first before everybody else. And if you go back to Malcolm X, when some people said, but Malcolm, we also want to join your struggle. We want to help. He was very clear. He said, well, it's good that you may want to help, but the responsibility of taking ourselves out of a quagmire is not something that we can share with anybody. It's not something that we can outsource. It becomes primarily our responsibility. And this is where Africa failed. And maybe Pan-Africanism, as it was defined, without it being diluted, as it has happened over the years, may be the answer. I think what we do know now is that the shift from it and what we have adopted and used has not worked for Africans, and more of the same will not work. And with that, I want to thank you for a wonderful rendition of giving us or giving hope a chance by telling us that there is an antidote to Africa's myriad challenges. Professor Agyemang, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate your thoughts, your remarks. I want to ask, publishing material on Pan-Africanism, especially with the kind of orientation we are talking about, you are not likely to get any press around. I have been striving. I have been retired for about 12 years now. I have been trying to, I'm publishing a journal to try to raise consciousness. It is all out of my pocket. You can't get Black people to help when the cause is about Black dignification. They are not, I mean, listen, they will have money to travel to London to attend somebody's birthday party, spend a week there but you ask them for $2 to support any of these efforts. The University of the Black World, some programs that Pan-Africanist oriented programs that I have written, nobody's interested. I'm wondering if your university will at some point begin to think about establishing a publishing branch, a publishing center where materials of this kind will find reception and publication. I am telling you, it is very, very difficult.
Well, without jumping the gun, I don't know if my vice chancellor, my boss, whether she's here, but I can assure you that she can speak on behalf of the university. Professor Ntose, there's an offer there.
Well, I'm awake, sir. And I open and I put up my hand and say, we're in. We as a university, when I did the opening remarks, I alluded to the fact that we have got a mission as this university to say that we are positioning ourselves of becoming a node for African thought. This idea started about 3 years ago, Prof. Siep, that I thought seriously about where is the scholarship of our people? Because everything we do, we want to imitate whiteness that doesn't even care about us and where we're going and who we are. So what we are trying to do as a university is to have a center for African scholars. As a result, we are planning a journey, Prof. Siepe and I, to some universities in US to meet with Africans, actually, that we believe can be part of the team that we put together, a strong team that is going to push the agenda, because we have put this as one of our strategic plans starting this year, 2022. And what is due now for us is to really live the Africanness as a university in Africa, not just as an African university. So we seriously putting together our heads with our scholars, like Professor Masoka this morning is worked on indigenous knowledge and all those things. We are pulling a team together. So we're very much excited by Prof. Ntombela in education to take this initiative and call on you, because I said before you came in, I said, your paper give me shivers, because it's what we have been thirsty for as a country, because as a country, we have got poverty of knowledge about Africanness and Africa. So we're very, very excited as an institution to have made that relationship with you. And immediately we read this paper. I said to Prof. Siepe, let's meet this professor, because we are coming to New Jersey very soon. So we're going to write to you and we're going to put this concept, because we really need our people to come together with us. In South Africa, there are so many people, like all these former white universities that are still white. They use this Africa just to smear our heads and our eyes, so that we are blinded by the so-called, instead of people transforming their institutions, they just use African something, African Renaissance, there's decolonization. There is no in-depth understanding of what this means, because you cannot do that for us without us, because it is our lived experience that when you talk to this subject, you're talking about us, and we have lived this experience. Therefore, the articulation is coming from our inner beings, unlike people who want to borrow it and write about us for us. So I'm very excited to have Professor Siepe as part of my team, because that's the spirit I wanted. I wanted someone that would come and inject that life in me, because this is my area of study, race and racism. I knew it when I took it up that it was not fashionable to name these things, but I did not feel like I owe it to anybody to do what is fashionable, because I said, this is my experience, this is who I am, and this is what I'm going to write about. So I'm very excited. So you don't even have to convince us. We are there. We're coming to New Jersey. Prof. Siepe tonight is writing to you.
Professor Ogumani, you've just heard that is an order that I must deliver on.
I welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is exciting. So exciting, Prof.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Also for our thanks and appreciation to you for your comprehensive response, and also to our Prof. Mtose. I'm sure we are all looking forward to getting that started. Thank you so much. So what I'm going to do now, due to time constraints, I'm actually going to give an opportunity to our colleagues to pose their comments and their questions. We can see that many colleagues have posted their comments and questions on the chat, but I'm actually going to give you an opportunity to voice your comments and questions. Can we have 3 colleagues, please? Any 3 colleagues? Prof. Masoka, I also noticed that you posted something on the chat. Would you like to read your comment out?
If they can raise their hand.
If you can raise your hand.
Chair, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, you audible, Prof. Masoka. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think for my side, it's appreciation and really to echo what the Vice Chancellor, stated earlier on in appreciating the depth of this presentation by Professor, and also the response by Professor Siepe.
You've gone mute, Prof.
Prof.
Oh, no.
Masoka, are you still?
Yes, no, I am back. I'm back.
Thank you.
Yes. No, I was saying earlier on that it was an appreciation for the presentation, Professor Opoku. That is highly appreciated. But also when I posted a question and also appreciating the fact that we need to go beyond memory and pain. It is a process, and I think what then becomes a serious challenge is in terms of how we then deal with this and align it and outline it for ourselves. And I think it's us now outlining it for ourselves. But previously, you'd have the very same person who colonizes you, who degrades you. The very same person comes back with a model of salvation. But I think that has been a very serious problem. But now saying that we're taking it upon ourselves, and I've said it in one of the chapters that I've actually written to say, it can only be done by Africans and only Africans for themselves. And I think we need to be very serious about it in terms of, and I'm glad about the discussion going on this morning, that it's so that we don't actually pay lip service to it, ensuring that in terms of the material that is actually used in the classroom is the material that is produced by Africans themselves. The kind of the research methodologies and approaches should actually be very, very indigenized, decolonized, and that we deal with that until we deal with that. And the third issue, which actually bothers me, is the question about language, which we need to grapple with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Masoko. I also see Prof. M. Ndlovu. Are you still with us? I've noticed you've also posted quite a bit on the chat. Would you also like to voice some of your comments? Prof. Ndlovu, are you still with us? Okay, while we're waiting for Prof. Ndlovu, is there anybody else who would like to be given an opportunity? I see Kayalishla, excellent. Okay. Prof, okay, I'm going to give an opportunity to Prof. Kutame from the Faculty of Education.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, Program Director. Mine is just to appreciate, the talk from the heart. You could see that Prof. Okobu, was speaking from the heart. That is what he has experienced. And when a person speaks like that, you could see, that's why you got carried away. And the one thing that I liked about what you were telling us is that it's a challenge. The challenge that you put to us, that can't we as Africans do things for ourselves? That is what I took home, from what you said. It's a challenge, and I think we are taking up that challenge. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Kutame. I've also noticed that Prof. Angela Nicholas, you've also posted something on the chat. Would you like to be given an opportunity to say a few words? Okay, all right. So now I'm going to actually hand over the floor to Prof. Nomlomo, who is going to be doing our closure and a vote of thanks. Prof. Nomlomo.
Colleagues, greetings. My task is very easy. It's just to extend a vote of thanks to all the participants for today's event, that is the celebrations for Africa Day. Firstly, I would like to extend our appreciation and thanks to the Vice Chancellor and Principal of this institution, Professor Mtose, for providing us with an intellectual space in terms of trying to link the events to our UniZulu vision, whereby we redefine the institution as a node for African thought. Thank you very much, Vice Chancellor, for providing that intellectual leadership. Secondly, I am very, very pleased to extend our appreciation and thanks to our honored guest, Professor Opoku Agyeman. Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much for your wonderful and refreshing insights on Pan-Africanism. Thank you for provoking us to reflect on the realities of Pan-Africanism while navigating the prospects of this phenomenon. We will really take this as a food for thought as we conceptualize our route or our journey towards strengthening our identity as a node of African thought. Thirdly, Prof. Siepe, thank you so much for your response to Prof. Agyeman's discussion. You are always refreshing. Thank you very much for your insights with regard to advancing debates around Africanism. I cannot forget the Dean of the Faculty of Education, who has been so busy with her team over the past months with regard to organizing this wonderful event, that is the celebrations towards Africa Day. Thank you so much, Professor Ndombela and your team. Thank you for leading from the front and for ensuring that we celebrate Africa as Africans on the African continent. I also want to extend our thanks to the entire faculty and your organizing team, as well as everyone who has participated in making sure that this event becomes a success. I cannot forget our professional support staff, including our Director of Marketing and Communications, with her brilliant and effective team for ensuring that everything has been properly captured so that it remains in our records. Thank you very much, Ms. Ntleko and your team. And last but not least, many thanks to the university community and everyone who has joined us online as we celebrate Africa Day at UniZulu. Your UniZulu, our UniZulu. Thank you very much to all. Ngiyabonga.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much, colleagues. Really appreciate everyone who made this a success. From this morning, we had the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, and now the Faculty of Education. Your support has been phenomenal. We really appreciate you.